In this tutorial, we will use 4 steps to create a good research poster in Adobe Illustrator. And step 1 is to download the free templates using the link in the description box or in the course description of your Simplified Science dashboard. And with the template downloaded, you're going to want to open the template. My first recommendation is to make a copy so that you're not going to change or alter the initial template. You can start working in a new file that's saved. So I'm going to press this green button to expand, and I'm going to File, Save As, and save my poster design that I'm going to create for this tutorial in a logical folder with a logical name that makes sense to me. For me, I am just going to call this my Adobe Illustrator research poster, and I'll say example, and I'll keep the current width and height in the file name. I will make sure it's in a folder that makes sense to me, which is good, poster templates, and I will press save. And I want to keep all of the standard settings for my Adobe Illustrator file and press OK. And now I am working from a new file that I can edit and know that I won't be editing the original template file. If you do edit the template file, know you can always re-download it from the links provided. We are now ready for step 2, where I will choose the poster dimensions, fonts, and color schemes. Starting with poster dimensions, I want you to click on the artboard tool in this left-hand panel to see that this template is in fact 48 inches by 36 inches for the dimensions, which is a standard US poster size, but every conference will have their own requirements for the dimensions of your poster. So double check what those requirements are, write them down, and know that you can actually customize this template. That's, even though it's set this at a certain width and height, you can make this template become any height and width you need for any poster design. So let's say, as an example, I need to go to a European conference and they are using an A0 poster size, which is a different poster size that requires using millimeters instead of inches. The first thing I recommend you do is not touch the template, but create with the artboard tool a new artboard. And it doesn't matter what size, just click and drag a second artboard into the workspace. And then I want you to go up to the ruler in your workspace, which if you're not seeing this ruler, make sure you use the shortcut Command R or Control R. So Command R if you're on a Mac, Control R if you're on a PC Windows. And with the ruler, you can right click to see this menu and change your dimension measurements from inches to whichever is required, usually millimeters or centimeters. And now you can see the width and height is represented in millimeters. And what I want to do is I want to change this to the A0 width and height of 841 millimeters wide and 1,189 millimeters tall. So this is a more standard width and height for the European conferences. And this is now going to be where I want to move all of these templated elements to the new poster size. And what I recommend next is going from this properties panel to instead looking at the layers panel to see that my original poster template artboard is made of 4 main layer groups. There's the poster graphics, which are just containing right now empty spaces for the logos. There's the poster text, where if I click it on and off this eyeball, I can see the text is in this set of layers. The poster background, sections background, that's all those white spaces over the main background, are here and they're locked. I want to unlock them if I'm going to move them to my new artboard. And then finally I have the background, which is just that blue top and back bottom background. Again, if you click on this, you can see the layers. And for creating a new poster size, I want to make sure all of these are unlocked These were originally locked because if you want to quickly move forward and just use the template I have and update the text and add graphics, you don't want these background sections to move. Right now, we do want to move them around to match our new poster size. And if you're not seeing the layers show up in this panel, know that you can always go to Window and make sure that the layers, artboards, color guide, and property sections are showing up by clicking and making sure they're showing up in your window. Okay, so next step. If we are going to make this a European conference poster size, what we want to do is we want to have the selection tool, which you can use shortcut V or click on this here. Make sure all my layers are unlocked. And now I can, one at a time, I would recommend starting with each group. So the background, I can click on these from the layers panel. I can drag them to my new poster and I can just change their size to be overlapping this artboard. I can also have each of these shapes, so this gradient shape, if I wanted, I can actually go back to the property section and specifically make the width of this match the poster size. So 841 millimeters wide, 1189 millimeters tall. I can then just unclick and click and align this to the artboard. I can do the same process with this top title area where I don't want it to be as tall as the artboard, but I do want it to be 841 millimeters wide. And I can then sort of move it to the side, click and unclick, and use the alignment tools to align up and line to the side, and then manually just change this bottom, drag it up and down to change the height of the title. And with these backgrounds set on my new background, I'm going to lock it and I'm going to work my way up and move over this poster sections background. Now, I may have wanted to keep a background just so I could see what I'm doing. I could have made a copy of both of these. Right now, I'm actually going to go ahead and create a background copy, move it to the bottom of this layers panel. And at the very least, this will allow me to just use this gray templated shape, and I'll lock it to see what I'm doing when I'm selecting and moving over these other sections. Okay, so what I want to do next is go ahead and move, including the text, some of these sections. So what you can see is I'm dragging, clicking and dragging to select, I'll zoom in, this entire acknowledgements bubble. I can zoom in and out using Command minus and Command plus. I can drag over the acknowledgement section. I can highlight the results section and drag that over. As you can see, some of these I may want to be even adjusting the size as I go. And you can use the size by just dragging this whole selected subset, and know that you can realign and recenter the references text at another time. I'm going to group this, align it to the bottom, and just start to, again, reformat and rearrange some of this. But for today's tutorial, I'm going to keep using this 48 by 36 inch template. So I will actually end up going ahead and using Command Z to undo all of that work I just did to create a new poster size. So Command Z all the way to the beginning where even these layers are locked and this artboard doesn't exist. And I'm going to start fresh using the template that I originally started with, and I'm using space bar to center myself, going to click on research poster title and then press Command plus, that's Control plus if you're on a PC. I'm on a Mac, so I use Command instead of Control. I'm going to center myself, and we're going to work through the other parts of step 2, where once you have the dimensions set, the next thing you will want to do is to choose the font and color design. So in this template, the poster text uses two fonts to work with this template. It uses Arial for the internal text. So by clicking on each of these text boxes, you can see that the internal text is using the character style Arial and a nice large font for print of 24 points. And then the titles, both of this poster and of each section, are using Myriad Pro. And I recommend sticking to just two different fonts that do not use, that are sans serif. So serif just means sort of the fancy ends, where like New York Times Roman has little feet on the end of each character. Use any font that does not have those serif ends, so sans serif fonts, and you can change this. So let's say you wanted to use Helvetica as another very commonly used font instead. You can use Helvetica font instead of Arial, but I'm going to go ahead and just use the template font styles. And there's rare instances where the requirements for a given conference will require a certain font style, but for the most part, I think you have a lot of freedom here. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my template style and let you know that you can go through and adjust these. And I will say real quick, a quick trick. So let's say you did want all of that Arial font to become Helvetica. Know that you can select whichever font style, go to select same font family, and this will select all of those that are in Arial, so all of these boxes that are Arial font, and I could then change all of them to Helvetica. Just keep in mind this will remove the bold formatting because unfortunately Adobe Illustrator doesn't allow you to just sync bold versus italics versus regular font. So if you want to go the easy route, just keep it in Arial. But if you really desperately want to change one of these fonts, just know that you are going to have to go back and individually choose certain ones to be bold versus regular font styles. And for now, we're going to keep them as is. But for now, so that's the font. The font is done. But the trickier thing that you may also want to adjust is the color scheme. So this poster is a blue color scheme that works very well for most people's presentations. But let's say you are at a university that has a red color scheme or a purple color scheme. I did want to show you that even though this has a setting that allows you to use this blue and just carry on and quickly make a poster, you can adjust the color of this template to anything you want. And how I recommend doing this is starting by just going to Google, and let's say I go to Stanford University and I just wanted to look at the Stanford logo. So Stanford, without a D, pardon me, the Stanford logo is red and there is green. I don't love the idea of using green together. I might also click in to their website to see what are their website using. So if I went to Stanford, I would know that actually right here on their website, this is a great illustration of the typical colors they're using. They're using a bright blue, a tan color, and a red to represent them. I'm going to go back and also go ahead and take a screenshot of the red they're using in their logo, or just download the logo, save image as. And for all of these elements, I can then take them back into my Adobe Illustrator file. So I took a screenshot using Command-Shift-4 on my Mac, which you'll use the snipping tool on a PC. And what you can see is if I zoom out, I can now create a few new shapes. So I clicked on the shape tool. I'm going to make a few new color boxes. I'm going to pull in the images that I downloaded by taking those downloaded images and dragging them into my Adobe Illustrator workspace. So I'm going to drag that Stanford logo and properties embed. Anytime you bring in an image and you want to permanently connect it to your artboard space, make sure you have that image selected, go to Properties and Embed. And I'm also going to drag, drop, and embed this website color. And now you're going to see why I've pulled up these little white rectangles, and I'm actually going to use V, copy, paste, and make 6 rectangles, where if I have one of these little rectangles that have white fill, and I click on I, or I select the eyedropper tool by clicking on this symbol, I can now change the color of this rectangle to whatever I click on with the eyedropper. So I want to change this to the Stanford red. I want to change this one to the Stanford blue, and I'm using Command plus to get zoomed in and pick a blue pixel. I can see that my fill has been changed in that box there. Zoom out, and I'll go ahead and copy paste and create this gold or tan color. And now I have these 3 main colors that are used on the Stanford website that I can rebrand my poster with the colors that match my university. And I'm going to want more than just these 3 colors. I'm going to want to probably have roughly 3 for each of these, where this is my inspiration color, where I'm just selecting these additional boxes, pressing I, and matching the color. And I can then click and double click this fill to, from this original color, choose some of the lighter colors that I think will look best to accent it and have a few accent color options that look good. So I think that looks nice. For the blues, I may even want to have a darker blue as an option, and then maybe a lighter blue as an option. And your university may even have specific hex color codes that you can use to match your university's brand guide. So you can even ask your department, hey, does our university have a brand guide so I can match the exact colors we're using everywhere to represent our institution or your company? So know that you can also directly update your color guides here to whatever you want, specifically following your university. If you don't have one, or if you want to create your own by doing this method and selecting using the color picker, that's also still a great way to do it. I'm going to use one more and darken this and have that orange color as a nice accent that parallels off that nice tan color. So this is a great color scheme. And I'm now going to use this color scheme that I created to update my poster. So let's say I do want this poster's layers, backgrounds to change to match my new color scheme. I'm going to first unlock these backgrounds. I'm going to then select by either clicking on the element where I can see that the one I've clicked on is this big rectangle in the background. It's this blue color. Let's say I want to change everything with this dark accent blue color to the Stanford red that I've selected here. What I recommend you do is you go to Select, Same, and then select Fill Color so that you're selecting all of the graphics, in this case, these title blue elements and this background rectangle. I'm then going to press I to get the selection tool, and I'm going to change them to my Stanford red. So already I'm in a place where if I wanted to insert this Stanford logo and maybe also put it on a white background, this is going to look great. I can go to my poster graphics. I can delete the word logo. And already this is looking great. I have the Stanford logo pulling exactly from that Stanford red that will print well. And the next thing I'm going to want to change is probably the background. And I may use these accent colors in other ways. The blue actually almost looks nice. I could change this background blue. So if I go back here and I change by selecting this rectangle, going to Properties, Edit Gradient, because this is a gradient. It's not going to be editable if I just click on this fill and stroke. I need to go to Properties with it selected and click Edit Gradient and click on these 3 dots to see my panel options. And I could do 2 ways. I actually kind of like the blue color, so I could just change this so it more closely represents the website colors, and I could change this color blue that represents this bottom of the gradient, this darker blue. I've selected the color. I'm going to click on this color picker. I'm going to change it to the Stanford blue color. And I think that looks really nice. If I wanted to, I could also just make this whole poster Stanford red everywhere. And in that case, I could go and change this color to the pink color instead. I may want to have maybe not as dark a color, maybe even another lighter pink that plays off of this reddish pink color. So I'm going to change and create an even lighter, closer to white option. And go back, Edit Gradient, click on the 3 dots or click on this dot, but I like using this gradient tool. Changing this very light blue of this gradient, so this upper part of this gradient, clicking the color picker on the gradient tool and changing it to the pink. And that's another way where I can change all of this poster settings to match a different color scheme. And I just wanted to show you this option. As with the poster dimensions, I'm going to go back to the original template. Again, you don't have to change any of this. If you open this file and you don't want to change anything about the color schemes, you don't have to. You can open it up and start to work with all of the individual elements like we're about to do for the rest of this tutorial. So step 2 is done. I, in this case, am moving forward with the dimensions from the template, the font from the template, and the colors from the template. And we are now ready for step 3, where we are going to add the text, data, and designs to the poster. Let's start with the text. So on this research poster template, you can click using the selection tool click into any of these text boxes and see that they correspond with layers in my poster text layers. And if I want to edit these, I can click on one, use Command+, or that's Control if you're on a PC Windows, to zoom in, double click to see that the text box is activated, and then move the cursor to highlight and add text to the poster. Importantly, when I want to get out of this box without editing the text any further, you can click on the selection tool again, click on the poster, and now you can move around freely using the space bar to turn on the hand tool and to click around to edit any other text box. Importantly, I do recommend that if you're going to do a poster that you don't just retype all your text into here. For any presentation or poster or publication you might be working on, I'm hoping that you guys are going to keep your own doc. So in this case, it's a Word doc that you're drafting your title, your collaborators, your abstract, and obviously this will continually evolve with your research and the additional results that you get. But this makes it much easier to be drafting all of the content for all of your purposes for presentations and slides, as well as posters, to then copy and paste, because copy and pasting from most software for docs works very well, where you can double click, highlight, and paste things like the title and the researchers. And this is from my PhD research. It was published in Nature Communications. So this is now an article that is open source. People can read it. And I'm just copying and pasting and filling in my information. This is by far the fastest way. I mean, you can individually type all of these things. Sometimes you need to zoom in to be a little more clear about what you're clicking on. But highlighting and replacing text and clicking the selection tool to get out is the fastest way that I found to move content from a draft concept onto the poster. Now, I've already added the title text elements, but I'm going to maybe just rearrange these a touch And also point out that as I've pasted these, and I'm just using the arrow keys to move these up, holding Shift to jump them a little higher. Going to move this up a little higher. You don't want anything to land too close to the edge of the borders of your poster. Make sure there's at least a half an inch or an inch for printing purposes. But right now, I'm liking the overall fonts and sizes chosen. And I now like the distance of these boxes. But an important step I wanted to point out is that as I copy paste, not all things transferred appropriately. So the superscript that shows up on my Word doc here, right, for this association with me and the pediatric research program, these don't translate with every copy paste. There are some types of formatting and elements that you're going to have to go in through Illustrator, click on the paragraph or character properties that show up with the text tool on. And you can also see these in this properties panel. I think having the properties panel open is one of the easiest ways to see some of these. And you'll need to click on more options to then see that through the character settings, this is where you can get some additional features such as superscript. So for all of these numbers, I'm going to just highlight, make sure that my little tool is on, and superscript these so that all of these can be properly formatted in Illustrator. I wish everything was a perfect one-to-one copy-paste between software that's Word software and Illustrator, but unfortunately that's just not the case. Not everybody translates directly one-to-one perfectly. And as I'm looking at this and doing my superscripting, what you may want to see is that you also may want to reformat this, and I want to show you a few things about reformatting this in the text box. But first, let me just finish my superscripting so that can be done. Superscript, no comma. Okay, I finished my superscripting. There's superscripting to do in the second box, but you get the point. I'm not going to do it there. What I wanted to make a point of is that as I superscripted, I noticed that Richard Goodman's name was hanging off a little bit, and for readability, I prefer to keep him on the same line. Because this is a text box, I can just use my selection tool and drag this edge over to make the text box smaller and to move the full name onto a second line. Now by doing this, I've shifted this to the left so it's no longer centered. And the quick trick is that if I want this text box perfectly centered, I don't have to manually do it. If I have this only selected, click a line and center it, it automatically will center to my artboard. And this is what's assigned normally. You can change how its alignment is, but this is what I strongly recommend you align to when you only have one thing selected. The default is align to artboard. Align to artboard, center it, and it automatically centered it. I'm also going to center this text just to make sure everything's perfectly centered. I didn't move them, so they should be based on the template, but it's a nice double check. So those little tips are important when you're working with text boxes. I also wanted to briefly point out that I can resize this text box to be, multiple layers. It can be square to the right, and it won't distort my text. However, if you end up wanting to add text and you click on the text tool, type tool, and you click, and let's make this bigger to see, let's say 60, and I just clicked, I didn't create a text box. Be aware that if you're adding text this way and you try to increase this text box size, you're going to distort the text because it was done with just one click versus creating a text box by clicking and dragging, which then fills the text. So be aware there are two different ways that you're going to be formatting text, and it matters a lot whether you've clicked once or whether you've clicked and dragged to add a text box. All of these in this template are text boxes, so just know that they will function where you won't scale and screw up the formatting of the text. But if you start to add your own text, you might find that that behaves differently than the boxes on this text. Next, I'm going to review how to work with paragraph and text settings. So as I move to these main paragraphs, what you may want to be aware of is that as you add your background or your abstract, the formatting of the paragraph will not transfer. So I'm going to double click, highlight that text, paste, and I'm going to click my selection tool, zoom into this box to show you a few things about this text. One, it shows that it went from one that is filling the space end to end with this justify formatting across the whole page to not being justified. You can also see that this text box shows hyphens, and it's a personal choice. It's up to you how you want your text to look. But there are paragraph settings where we can adjust each of these. And the final thing I want to point out is as I pasted this, it's too big or too much text for this box. So if I want to increase this box, I may be able to see that, I can see all my text, and I may just need to either adjust the text to fit this box, or keep in mind you can always adjust the box to fit the text, which is what I do recommend. And we'll go through formatting this as an example, and then I'll quickly add the text to the other boxes after I do this paragraph. So clicking on this paragraph, you'll see the paragraph panel appear up here, and this is where you can do the main things that matter, which is the justification. Justify with last line aligned to the left is one that I often pick, but some people liked it justified all the way to the left. It's up to you, but I like this middle one, justify with last line to left, and I prefer no hyphens. That makes it easier for your user to read it. So with those two things complete, I can now adjust anything else I think I might need. In this case, if I wanted to fit the text box, I could highlight and change the font size, and I can change it in this property panels from 24 point to, let's try 22. And I mean, that's a great way to do this. And I can, anywhere between 18 point font is fine. I prefer to have closer to 20, 24 point font for readability on a poster, but altogether, I think 22 will still work, and I don't need to reformat the box around it. But let's say I did want 24 point font. Make sure you highlight your text, otherwise it won't change what it is you're trying to highlight, but you can highlight your text. And let's say then that means I need to adjust the layer in the background. Now these are locked layers for right now, right? If I try to select anything outside of this text, it won't select. But I can unlock these poster backgrounds and making sure that scale strokes and effects is checked. I want to scale the effects of my boxes. I can then select just this white background and pull it down to where this text box will now be fully in the text. I can obviously then have to adjust some of these other text boxes and move them to make the right amount of space. But going one at a time, it's not too much trouble to format to fit your own text, what you need with these text boxes. After I'm done formatting one text box, I will often then make sure that this is locked, and I'll maybe even lock the text that I'm done formatting so that as I go through and add and update all the sections on my poster, this is no longer, I'll even lock that guy, no longer accidentally editable. And so that's a good step as you add text and things and fill out and say, that section is done. I don't want it to move. Lock it up. Okay, so I'm now just going to quickly fill this text. So 3, 2, 1. The poster now has all of the main text outside of the results section added to the poster. And my final tips for formatting text are just a few additional things, and I'll click into the methods and the conclusions to show you, which is this text box is using Arial 22-point font, and this text is regular. It's not bolded or italic, whereas this title is slightly bigger. It's 24 and it's bold. So one very important thing is that you can't use the shortcuts like in Word where you Command B or Command I to bold. That's Control if you're on a PC. You have to highlight the text. Let's say I wanted Life Technologies bolded. You have to highlight that text and then select from either the Properties panel, Settings, to bold something, or you can also click the Character Settings from this top menu to see that you can bold and unbold and see your font selections this way. And that's just one common thing you may want to know. Again, for italics, you're going to have to go in, highlight those characters, and use that menu to italicize. And if you are going to adjust some other specific things, be aware that you have a lot of control to adjust more than just the font size and style. You can also adjust the spacing. So as you can see here, I have it set to auto, and auto is usually quite good. But let's say for whatever reason, you really wanted this to be much more spaced out. You can select much larger or smaller spacing. Let's say you're trying to cram a lot of text in, which I don't recommend. You can choose the space between lines, the space between characters. And I don't recommend using these settings until you really get to know Illustrator. You may want to use this one. That's probably the most common one to use, but auto is very good. And just be careful if you start to veer into these settings, especially for manuscripts. Some manuscripts do have character limits as to how close your characters can be. So just be aware that there's a lot of power in this tool, but also a lot of potential error if you go too far in formatting things. And the final thing I'll mention here is that as this text box, you can see I have moved this text box to the left, and that's because I'm going to leave a little space in some of these for some additional designs. For example, in conclusions, which I do strongly recommend if you're doing a poster, put a little summary, make it easy for somebody to just quickly, what's the main point of this study, and put those conclusions here. And know that you can put bullets in Illustrator. This is actually a relatively new feature. It's crazy it took this long to add it, but you can see that I've highlighted this section, and you can get this bullet menu with, you can use dots, dashes, empty dots or squares. You can adjust how close that first line left indent is and the size of the bullets, how far away they are, which level they are, 1, 2, 3 in. So there is a great way to do numbering and bullets that's new to Illustrator, and you just need to do it by selecting the text and seeing that this bullet panel shows up there as well as down here in the bullets and numbering in the properties panel. Okay, so that is all for text that I'm going to go through. The next section we're going to touch is how to add those designs and data to the poster. The 3 most common designs you will need to add to a poster are downloaded images, editable design templates, or you can also draw your own illustrations. So let's start with adding a downloaded image. And a common example of this is, let's say you want to have your institution represented. You can download JPEGs or PNGs of your alma mater's logo and drag and drop them onto your poster. Whenever you are using a downloaded image, make sure that you have the appropriate copyright rules to put it on your poster and or your presentation or your figures. And make sure that after you add it, the next step, no matter what image you're using, is to go to the Quick Actions panel and embed the image. This ensures that this image is now directly linked to this file and you won't lose it if you open this file up again. So first step, add an image and embed it. And in this case, I'm also going to want to crop this image because there's a lot of extra white space surrounding the logo that I don't want to include on my poster, but I do want a little bit of white space. So I'm going to change this crop, press enter, and now this image is in a good place to go over to where a logo is supposed to go. Hold shift while resizing it down to not distort the image, and then I can place this image on my poster, clicking the nearest object to then left align it to that object. And I'll maybe make it a little smaller because it's a little too close to the top for my preference for printing. And that looks pretty good. And I can add another logo on this other side, but just know adding images, embedding them, whether it's for your methods or conclusions, that's an easy way to do it. Another thing you may want to be doing if you're adding illustrations, let's say you want to add an illustration of your method. In this case, I used a lot of in ovo electroporation that's using developing chicken embryos. I could consider using an ellipse tool to draw the shape of an egg, to change that color of the egg to a grayish color. I can add perhaps that yellowish color in the center, and I can start to draw all sorts of things with Illustrator, right? I have the power to make an illustration, combine it, customize it, add a developing chicken embryo. But what I will say is that if you're not very good at using, let's say, this pen tool to customize and draw and merge shapes, another great alternative is to download editable templates. And Simplified Science Publishing does have a lot of templates that I routinely use. In this case, I also have chicken embryo templates. I have a lot of different animal model templates where this chicken embryo drawings, you can download this Adobe Illustrator file that also has SVG files. And in this case, I already have an example of what an electroporated chicken embryo method looks like. So I'm actually going to just take this, copy it, go back to my poster example, paste this, and have this be my overall represented method. I'm going to make sure that this background, as I edit it, is locked by using Command 2 to lock it, so it's no longer editable. Again, you can go to your layers panel and lock it manually, but I can now adjust the size of my developing chicken embryo. I can decide if I even want this background of an egg shape behind it or not. It's grouped. I can center it however I want. And that's looking pretty good. That's a good representation of what in ovo electroporation looks like. But I also want to add here an example developing spinal cord cross section, which I will also use from here, showing that this copy and paste is what it looks like when you're doing a cross section with whatever you're adding in this green pipette ending up on the plus electroporated side of this developing spinal cord. And this correlates to what they'll see in a lot of the data. And I do think that methods especially should be illustrated a little bit for your audience, especially if there's something unique about your animal model, to help your audience understand what it is you're doing. And knowing that if you are using Vector or Adobe Illustrator templates, you can edit these. So if I wanted this representation to not be green, I can click and ungroup and change colors. I can make this a blue color if that was more related to my research. If I had multiple different types of things I'm electroporating and those that need to have different colors, you can do those adjustments and customize every single bit of this. Again, if you wanted this to be very wide for some reason, you can use these two selection tools the direct selection tool and the main selection tool to adjust anything about any of these designs. Obviously, that's a very awkward lightning bolt. I'll undo it. But just pointing out that this can save you a lot of time if you're not quite used to using this to draw complex images on your own. And then the final method, again, is if you did want to draw your own, be aware that if you're starting to learn Illustrator, the best place to, let's say I wanted to draw a molecule that represents things binding, you are likely going to want to start by using a mix of shapes to then create and draw and merge. And I have a lot of other tutorials available and classes available to learn how to do this better, because using those tools will allow you to draw really cool complex things like this summary image. So this I've drawn in Illustrator, and what you can see if I ungroup it, because right now it's grouped, is that this illustration is a bunch of text boxes and shapes put together to make this Islet 1 LHX3 transcription factor that was very important to my research in my lab that I worked in. And all this is made of, if I go ahead and even just copy and paste this summary illustration here, I want to just show you that this illustration, all it was made of was using a series of rectangles that I then eyedropper tool had colored appropriately, that I rounded the corners, that I shift and rotated in different ways, and arranged with connectors in the right places. So again, just using rectangle tools to connect and build one half of the whole molecule. So just showing this NLI, how it was generally built. Selecting all of these shapes by holding Shift, using Shift M, and then merging them to get this individual shape. I would then build one half, this whole half, copy, paste it, properties, reflect it, and you can make awesome mirror image transcription factors and complex shapes. This can go a long way if you're not used to using the pen tool to draw those perfectly customizable curved lines. You can do a lot by drawing your own using shapes. And again, I do strongly recommend, if you're doing a poster, whether you're downloading images that have the copyright that you can use, or you're building your own, it really does help your audience to give them a summary of what they can expect. In this case, it's all about a microRNA and its role in determining motor neuron versus interneuron fate in the spinal cord, and having this be a very clear summary of what all the data is going to describe is very helpful. And again, if you aren't good at drawing these complex shapes, this is another thing that you can pull from things like downloadable templates, where I have a biological diagram template that is full of all sorts of cell types. So I got those neurons directly from my templates, and these are fully adjustable, customizable, copy-pastable design templates that are really helpful and save me a lot of time when I'm doing my work for clients and for various illustrations. Okay, so adding designs is an important part of any poster, and I've just shown you the techniques for the main ones that you're going to use. And the final bit of adding items to this poster is a very important section, and that is adding your data and results to the poster. There are many different ways to add data to posters in the results section, but I'm just going to show you my favorite method, which is to have an Adobe Illustrator file that is separate from my poster, that contains all of the figures I may want to use for either publications or for the poster. And For this example, this is a lot of data. I realize this is a fully prepared manuscript. And for most people who are doing posters, this may be your first research project. And just know that I'm going to do an example where it's helpful to even just sort of draft the order of the figures for your paper. But that doesn't mean you have to do it this way. If you have less data, you can increase the graph size to fill the space, or you can even make some of these method sections be, half of this result section. You can change anything about this poster to meet whatever it is that will tell your current scientific story best. But because I have a full paper, the way I usually handle this is by adding the full figures in the order in which I'm going to present them in a paper. And that can also be a great way to get feedback on a potential paper to people reviewing your poster. So by doing this, I can just copy and paste these grouped figures, some of which I've embedded as images that were already pre-formatted elsewhere by myself and others, or some of which are fully editable elements like this one. If I zoom in, this is a figure where I've kept all the editable elements, and it's really up to you whether you embed them as images or you keep all editable elements on this file. It's up to you and your personal preference, I think, is how I would word that. But keep in mind that if you are putting all editable elements here, be very cognizant that when you're doing this, you are grouping the whole figure appropriately so you don't accidentally smush, move, or delete any of these individual text elements. So right now, if I click on this, this is one group. If I ungroup it using Command-Shift-G, you could see that I might accidentally maybe copy and paste and leave off things like an error bar or a data point. And you want to move slow if you are working with a full editable file, or be very cognizant of when you have this grouped, like I just did. I use the shortcut to group and move and size and work in a poster with grouped images. Or again, you can export your images and use them as sort of this static single file. Okay, so those are just a couple notes. And my point again is that because I have this file, it's very easy for me to take a look and maybe not put all of this information, even though these can all go into my paper. It may not be worth putting everything you have on a poster because that can also be too much information for the file. So I'm just going to choose what I think right now are the most important pieces of data, which I do think these core figures are important, and maybe just one of these tables, in this case, this big table here. So if I select all these by holding Shift, I can press Copy and paste, and then move them all, click out, and begin to arrange them on my file. As far as arranging these to fit the space, I'm, before sizing anything, going to look at the layout and what might look best. Even though these may belong in a certain order, for fitting everything onto this file, I may choose to move some of these shorter figures down, the longer figures I'll stick together. And conceptually, again, this is a grouped, separated figure. I want this guy to be at the end along with these table of results. I've now roughly put these into place. I'm not going to start going into my formatting right away because I also need to fit a little text on here. When I'm doing this method of putting full figures onto a poster, I do like to have just the title text of my result sections. I don't want to add all of these ABCs used and ask for people to read. For my purpose, I think most of the time people just want to get the big picture, and then you're there by your poster to help explain what this big picture is. So let's say I copy this figure 1 text that I know goes to this figure 1. I can then press T for text box, click, and add that text. I can bold it and make it much bigger to stand out from the page. But keep in mind, I added this by only clicking. So let's say I wanted to have this be on 2 lines and I tried to move it, it will now squish it. So that was just a reminder that if you're going to be adding text to your posters, I recommend making the text box, copying and pasting. In this case, it's got a 48 point, not auto, distance. Let's see, let's even make that a little closer together. This is where this distance comes in handy. Let's do it at manually 30 as a distance there. I can delete this other text. And now I have nice large text summarizing this figure. And I know that I'm going to have a little extra space, so I am going to go ahead and select all of these and fill my space a little more with these figures. Align these to the top, space them out. Align these to the top, space them out. Hold Shift, click them over using the arrow key just a little bit. I'll also select all of them by highlighting them, make sure I don't have my background selected. And this is pretty good. They're evenly spaced. I'm using the alignment tools. And I can copy and paste this pre-formatted text box. And you know what, for this purpose, I don't like the adjustment. I'm going to do a left adjust for each of these. And I can just copy and paste this templated format I'm using for my text. And for each of these figures, copy, paste, and add their title. Again, this is definitely where your own personal preference will matter in how you format this. But this is how I like to do it for the most part, is try to come up with some figures that belong together with the data that makes sense. And if you're new to formatting in Illustrator, or new to creating figures, know that I have a lot of courses on how to actually pull these images in, create these graphics, and even use Excel and GraphPad graphs to create really clean figures in Illustrator if you're not used to doing that. And I'm going to just go ahead, and that was enough examples. I think you get the point. You can add a lot of data here. You can even pull it in directly from some of your graphing software if that's where you're at. But I do recommend you don't format your figures for the first time and your graphs for the first time on your poster because they'll be large. I do recommend if you're working with any of your raw data or your graphs that you're using that separate Adobe Illustrator file and formatting it with your figure in mind, because that's going to be the size of the graph. You need to have more honed in is, does it match the publishing requirements for the journal I'm interested in, not is it big enough for my poster. So always format for a figure size requirement and not the poster size requirement. And that'll save you a lot of time as you format all of your data for all the presentation purposes you may have. And here is my final poster design that I've optimized with some reconfiguration of my figures and text to make it stand out and make me happy. And now we are ready to use this design for the final and 4th step of this tutorial, which is to do some final formatting and then export your poster for printing. So the formatting step I want to take every time before I move to the print version is to go through and make sure that all the layers are unlocked besides the background. And if you've accidentally unlocked the background at some point, make sure that the layer isn't off to the side. Make sure it's perfectly aligned to the artboard and lock it. And then I recommend that you go through and use Command G or Control G if you're on a Microsoft PC and group each of these, make sure they're unlocked, group them. And by grouping each of these main sections, what you'll see is that we can do some final formatting to make sure all of these main sections are perfectly aligned. For example, this acknowledgements box isn't perfectly aligned with these other two elements, so I can hold Shift while clicking these grouped elements and click the right align button to perfectly align them. I can check that the bottom is perfectly aligned. And this is also where I wanted to point out, alignment will happen to the bottommost element. And if I try to align these all to the bottom, you'll see that this aligned to something that now makes it look off. Be careful that if any of your text boxes have their line below the design element, you could accidentally be adjusting things to an edge that is invisible to you but exists in Illustrator. So make sure your edges of your text boxes all fit within the design box as you do this step. So keep in mind that's why those designs were pushed below it. I want to put them up again, select them all, and now align to the bottommost object. So again, I'm just kind of going through, making sure that this is even aligned through the top. I want my title and these logos aligned to the top. I want to make sure that there is some space between the edges, top and bottom and side, that look good. This looks a little too close to this edge. I'm going to bring it down. Different printers will have different edge requirements, so just look those up and make sure that you're leaving enough space for the printer. And this is now looking really good. So I always like to do one final formatting check, make sure everything is aligned before doing the steps for export to print. Step 1 for export to print is to make sure you save this file. I often like to just file, save as, and actually even rename my poster to something that's final and final as of a date. So just, 2022 in my case, and month and day. So make sure that you save this file as an Adobe Illustrator file. Just use the exact same compatible settings, and know that you can then find this file. I know it's CMYK, but just in case before printing, make sure that you're following your printer instructions for CMYK or RGB. Most will want that printer for the ink color CMYK. And now you're ready to file, save as, or save a copy as a PDF or EPS file. Most printers will require you do a PDF. Some will require an EPS file, so just look at the printer settings. PDF is most common, and I may even say final, and then instead of copy, label this for print, so with the date, so I don't mess up which file is which one is my PDF versus AI file versus EPS file. So I do like to make sure my labeling is really clear. File, save as. I can keep the default settings and save the PDF. That'll include Illustrator editing capabilities in the PDF. But because I already saved one of my final files as an Adobe Illustrator file, I can make a smaller PDF by just unclicking this and save PDF. Again, this is disabling editing features, which is fine for printing. It just makes a smaller file. If you're afraid of losing editing features, keep it checked. That's fine. But for now, I'm going to uncheck it to make a smaller file, save PDF, and you are going to have to go then find that file that was exported in the folder you saved it in. Keep in mind, if you file and then save as instead of save a copy, and do the same step and use PDF and save, and let's say for now I will preserve editor capabilities, save PDF. If you do this instead of saving as a copy, that will overwrite the file you're in to be a PDF. So that is why that first step I recommended, make sure you save your final editable, full editable Adobe Illustrator file somewhere else when you're done, so that you can always go back and edit it. Because if you accidentally just save as, you can overwrite that file And if you choose Save As and you don't have the capabilities to edit it again, you could be losing a lot of your customized work for the future. So keep that in mind. But again, follow your printer rules, PDF, EPS, you can save it whatever you want. Just make sure you save your original file, and then you can add that and upload it to whichever printer you would like to get this poster printed. You've now completed the Research Poster Design tutorial for Adobe Illustrator. Check out the links below if you want to learn more about the course and template options available from Simplified Science Publishing. Thanks for watching and have a great day.